Thank you, Lakshmi. Welcome to Finacle Conclave and the fireside chat entitled Navigating to the Next Normal, Leading with Digital. I'm Joy Macknight, Managing Editor of The Banker magazine, which is part of the Financial Times Group. It's my great pleasure to introduce Nandan Nilekani, Non-Executive Chairman of Infosys. Thanks so much for making the time to join me today, Nandan.
It's a pleasure, Joy.
So you're a global business leader and entrepreneur, a co-founder of Infosys, and among other roles, led the company as CEO in the early 2000s before leaving to work with the Indian government to drive its digital agenda. As part of this digital drive, you're credited with building Aadhaar, India's biometric identity scheme, while chairman of the Unique Identification Authority of India. Today, more than 1 billion are enrolled in this scheme, and the program really acts as a leading light for other countries around the world. Your vision has also inspired the creation of India Stack, a pioneering set of application programming interfaces that allows governments, businesses, startups, and developers to use a digital platform to solve problems associated with the move to remote, paperless, and cashless service delivery. So today, as well as being chairman of Infosys, you're also a philanthropist, a signatory to the Giving Pledge, and author of Imagining India, The Idea of a Renewed Nation, as well as a new book coming out soon, which is called The Art of Bitfulness, Keeping Sane in the Digital World. And we'll talk about this new book later on. So I have to say, there's so much to talk about in such a short time. But let's start with a question fitting the theme of the conference, which is scaling digital with purpose. Given your background, especially with your work with Aadhaar, you are well placed to talk about employing digital at scale. Tell us,
Thank you.
What does it take to design solutions at mass scale? What kind of mindset, skill sets, and tool sets are really required?
Thank you, Joy, and thank you for the question. I really learned about developing digital at scale, as you said, when I joined the government of India after retiring from Infosys in 2009, and I was a cabinet rank minister in the Indian government, leading the Aadhaar project, which today has issued 1.27 billion Indian residents a digital ID. And what I learned was that when you think about scale, you need to think about scale on the technology side and make sure that the platform you're building is able to deal with a billion people's transactions. But equally important, it's about scale on the business side or the front end side so that you can scale up to a billion users. In the case of Aadhaar, for example, we had to build a very highly scalable enrollment engine which allowed people to enroll anywhere in the country at any time. And at peak, this system was processing 1.5 million transactions a day, over 35,000 enrollment stations. And this was possible because we designed it to be modular, allowed each enrollment station to join independent of the others, and appointed a large number of institutions that could actually do the enrollment. At the back end, we had to use technology for biometric deduplication, because this is the first time in the world that anybody had given 1 billion people a digital ID using biometric deduplication. Now, to give you a scale of that challenge, if there were 500 million people in the database and 1 million new people enrolled that day, there was 500 trillion matches you have to do at the back end to identify duplicates. So, it's a really, part of it is technology, and thanks to the internet giants, we now have billion consumer kind of software capabilities in open source. But the design of it has to be to unlock capacity at the back end in terms of technology and at the front in terms of the citizen engagement. So that's one of the big lessons I learned. And scale cannot be post facto. You have to design a system for scale from day one.
Okay, so Aadhaar has been very transformational for India. Can you share some examples of how it's improved the lives of people and businesses? And in particular, I'd be interested to understand how the banking ecosystem has evolved as a result.
Well, Aadhaar has played a huge role in financial inclusion and acceleration of financial services using digital technology. The BIS has done a report on Aadhaar and says that if you look at the number of bank accounts to GDP, what would have taken 46 years, India did in 8 years. And that acceleration happened because of the fact that it was very simple. Once you had an Aadhaar number, you could do an electronic know your customer and open a bank account in 1 minute. And a few 100 million bank accounts have been opened in India in the last 5-6 years. We also treated the Aadhaar number as a financial address. So you can send money to an Aadhaar number and automatically with straight through processing, the money gets credited into the bank account. And this is the basis for the world's largest direct benefit transfer system. So government can transfer money into people's accounts in a few, very quickly in real time. And this was very, very useful, Joy, in the pandemic, because in the pandemic, as you know, governments around the world decided to make emergency cash contribute, give to every resident of the country to tide over the crisis. And India was able to use the DBT platform built on Aadhaar, and over 100 million people got immediate money into the bank account. And on the other side, we have something called the Aadhaar-enabled payment system, where any merchant in a village or a business correspondent with a smartphone can do an Aadhaar authentication using biometric or OTP, and you can withdraw your money from a bank account. So this was a huge source of relief for many, many hundreds of millions of poor and vulnerable people who got money into the bank accounts. And when you contrast that with many other countries where they issued paper checks and it took weeks and months to reach the money, I think this was a transcendental movement in the use of digital financial services for a society.
Okay, but how do you see its application evolving in the future? And my other question is, what advice could you give other governments around the world that are embarking on a mass digital ID project?
Well, we have actually three parts of the India stack. I'll come back to that later, but digital ID is one of them. And what we realize is that having a digital ID of this kind is fundamental to giving access. If you can use your digital ID as a KYC, you can open a bank account, buy an insurance policy, buy a mutual fund, get a mobile connection, and therefore it reduces the barrier of people accessing services, which is why you can expand the market or have more inclusion happen very quickly. But the important thing is to think of this as an ID which is foundational and not functional. Often what happens when governments take up ID projects, they combine the function with the foundations. Therefore, if you're issuing a passport, it's both a document for you to travel as well as an ID. If you're issued a driver's license, it's a document that entitles you to drive and an ID. What we did was we unbundled the ID from the function and said Aadhaar is just an ID that says John is John or Tom is Tom. And whether John is eligible for a passport will be decided by the passport system. Whether somebody else is eligible for a driver's license will be decided by the driver license system. So unbundling the ID to create a foundational ID on which many functions can be done is the heart of the design. And that's something we must think of, and I would recommend that to governments around the world.
Excellent. So let's talk about the India stack. You've consistently argued that this is India's single most important innovation to formalize the domestic economy through digital services. So can you explain a little bit about what you mean by this? And then where is the India stack having the biggest impact today, and what's the potential for the future?
The India stack has three parts, Joy. The first is identity. We talked about it, and the identity allows you to do a KYC to open a bank account, do an authentication to withdraw your money from the bank account. You can digitally sign a document with your Aadhaar number. And you also have a digital locker where you can store your documents electronically. So these are all that services that are around the ID. The second part of this is payments. And India has built the NPCI, the National Payment Corporation of India, has built a unique payment system called UPI, which is state of the art, any bank account, any mobile phone to any mobile phone, real-time payment system. And last month, this payment system did 2.2 billion transactions and is the foundation of digital payments in India. And this again is where the consent for the payment is unlocked from the bank account. So you can use any app. For example, you can use Google Pay or WhatsApp Pay or Paytm or Phone Pay or Amazon Pay. and they can all, behind the scene, they all use the UPI payment rails. So this is payments is a second big part of it. Creates high volume, low cost payments at scale. And the third very important thing is what's called as data empowerment, which is that how do we put data in the hands of people so that they can use their own data to get financial services. And this system, for example, if I'm a small business, I can use my tax payments and my invoice details and get credit from a bank. If I'm a consumer, I can share my bank statement, which has all my monthly sales transaction, my monthly salary transactions, and use that to get a consumer loan. And this ability to put the data in the hands of consumers, empowering them, is really the heart of the data empowerment architecture in India. So these three things, Aadhaar as identity, UPI for payments, and the data empowerment system are fundamentally transformational in the way financial services can be delivered to 1 billion people.
Excellent. My next question is around the fact that countries in Europe and the Americas maybe have been a bit slow off the block, considering how financial services are really evolving in the Asia-Pacific region, particularly in India and China, with large modern payment platforms like Paytm, Alibaba, and WeChat. How can these models and associated innovations be applied in a more global context? And what advice would you give financial institutions and regulators as they apply these in their respective geographies? My big question is really around, which I think is coming to the fore now, which is how can regulators, governments ensure a safe and stable financial system without really stifling innovation?
I think that's a great question, Joy, and that's what actually India has done. All the payments are within the banking system. All the banks are under the regulator. All the payment transactions comes under a law called the Payment and Settlement Act. But because of the unique architecture of UPI, you can have very innovative companies and distribution to connect to the banks and offer it as a very good consumer application. So Google Pay, for example, allows you to do payments on your phone using Google or Amazon Pay or Phone Pay and so on. So basically, we have all the robustness and strength of a financial system where the banks are involved. At the same time, innovators can apply applications in front of these payment rails and make it very innovative and consumer friendly. So we believe that India has cracked the code for combining innovation with regulatory strength. And this is the challenge around the world. We have seen in China some of the things that are happening there in terms of the regulator and the large payment companies. In Western countries, there's now move to build newer real-time systems in payment. The Fed, for example, in the US, has talked about instant payment system called FedNow, which they want to launch in 3 years. So the thing that has happened is that in the West, payments evolved many, many decades back, and therefore they were built using the technology of the day. The advantage that China and now India have is we were able to build these platforms ground up in the 21st century using the latest technology. And that not having a legacy, therefore, actually helps you to leapfrog and build very modern, sophisticated financial systems.
Excellent. And you touched on it a little bit before about the COVID pandemic and how it sort of had an impact. Obviously, it's had a profound impact on people and industries worldwide. In your executive journey, you've seen several disruptions and have successfully navigated challenges to create a stronger business. While the current situation is unique and unprecedented, what recommendations could you have for senior business leaders on how they can navigate their organization's next steps?
Joy, I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head. There has been a massive acceleration of digitization brought about by the pandemic, and digital changes and behavior changes that would have taken years to happen had happened in a matter of weeks. So I think that's very true. What this has taught us is, number one, that digital is an imperative in every industry, and having digital capabilities is essential for survival. It's also important that we use digital to create what I call as optionality. In other words, strategy is not about saying we'll do A or B, but strategy is saying, can I do A or B based upon the circumstances? And I'll give you a couple of examples. If you look at what happened in US retail, a very large number of famous companies went bankrupt because they could not cope with the fact that customers stopped coming to the mall or to the shop. But those companies that had done an excellent job on e-commerce, like Walmart and Target and Home Depot and Lowe, they did very well. They also figured out different ways for customers to access things. Customers could get it delivered to their home through e-commerce. Customers could come to the store to pick it up. Could pick it up on the curbside. McDonald's was able to have a drive-through, so people could just drive and pick up the hamburgers. So this kind of optionality for consumers, where they can access what they want, either in the store, at the home, in the parking lot, that's what made these companies successful. So I think what we're learning is digital acceleration is one part, but also creating optionality so that no matter what happens, you are able to continue to do business. For example, at Infosys, which has 240,000 employees in 40 countries, we were able to go to work from home in a matter of weeks because our network was designed for anyone to work from anywhere. It was fully secure. This was a decision taken before the pandemic to make it very flexible. The flexibility that was there enabled Infosys to be very resilient. So the message in all this is that technology is not only critical, how you design it for redundancy, resilience, optionality, that becomes equally important.
Okay, great. Let's talk a little bit about purpose-driven leadership. So even before the pandemic, the attention on corporates' purpose and ESG, environmental, social, and governance, was on the rise. Today, it's really taken center stage, I think. So there's been a clear shift happening from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. And there are elevated expectations from businesses to address humanitarian, social, and environmental problems. Infosys has been a pioneer in this area. It has turned carbon neutral 30 years ahead of 2050, the timeline set by the UN's Paris Agreement. So can you tell us a little bit about Infosys's approach here and perspectives from your own journey?
Well, Infosys, right from the beginning, has been a very socially responsible corporation, practicing the highest standards of corporate governance, sustainability, and in terms of treating employees and all partners well, and so on. So that's been in our DNA since it was founded under the leadership of Mr. Narayan Murthy 40 years back. And over the last 10 years, we have accelerated the sustainability journey. And as you know, as you rightly said, we were declared carbon neutral in 2020, whereas the Paris Agreement really puts the deadline as 2050. But more than that, we've also done a lot of work in CSR through the Infosys Foundation in India and the US, and now we're starting one in Australia. So we're doing a lot of things for our employees. We have world-class campuses, stock option plans, huge investment in learning and education so that our people are constantly upgrading their skills. So we have a completely 360-degree view of how we run the company, practicing very high standards of corporate governance. So we find this is increasingly resonating with our customers. Our customers believe that we are a different company because of this focus. And we have recently set our ESG goals for 2030, which are very ambitious goals on sustainability, diversity of employees, on corporate social responsibility, on our foundation, and many other things.
Excellent. And I'm going to move on to your third book that you're publishing very soon, which is called The Art of Bitfulness, Keeping Sane in the Digital World. So can you share some of the insights that you cover in this book?
Sure, Joy. I think the book is about really, while I'm a great believer in technology for purpose, like you said, using digital technology to change the world for better, I think some of the recent trends in technology are also worrisome. The polarization, the fake news, all this stuff which is happening on social media and so on. And it's very easy for us to get subsumed into that because all these technologies are designed to engage you and keep you using it all the time. And therefore, this book is about how do we create a style of digital lifestyle where we actually can be on top of things and use technology in a way that benefits us, rather than just create more usage so that some advertiser can show us an ad or something like that. And we think that this is a crisis. So just like we have a climate change crisis, which is a very long but irreversible in many ways. We have had the pandemic crisis, which is dramatically causing contagion of viruses. The third crisis is really the crisis of the excess use of digital media. And so we're writing about our own experience on how we manage, and perhaps giving some tips to others on how they can manage their digital lives. In a way, it's much more purposeful and less frenetic.
Can you give a few insights in terms of what your top tips are?
Yeah, well, I can tell you my own thing. I don't use any social media at all. I do use Twitter, but I only use it to broadcast, some article I've written or something I want to communicate to my followers. I have a controlled approach to email. I have email slots. I don't. I use my phone only for making calls. I don't do any email on my phone, and I make sure that I have a lot of time in between when I'm not tethered to a digital device. That gives me more time to think and contemplate.
Excellent. And maybe my last question is really, what's next for you?
Well, I'm thoroughly enjoying my role as the chairman of Infosys. I retired from Infosys in '09 and came back 8 years later as the chairman. And it's now more than 3 years. And it's very exciting to be in a company when the whole industry around the world is going through the cusp of dramatic change. And I think Infosys is dealing with this challenge very successfully. I think it was the best prepared when the pandemic struck, and the results are showing it. And there's a huge transformation going on at Infosys, a business transformation, a technology rewiring, and a cultural rejuvenation. And it's exciting for me to be chairman of the company at this time, and I look forward to contributing more to its transformation in the coming years.
Excellent. With that, we've come to the end of our session. It's a bit of a shame because it was such a short time as far as I was concerned. But once again, thank you very much, Nandan. I much appreciate your time for making the time for what has been a very insightful chat. And I'm sure our audience would value the perspectives and the experience that you've been able to share over the last 30 minutes. And I also look forward to speaking to you again.
Thank you, Joy. It was great to have this interview, and thank you for finding the time to do the interview with me. All the best.
All the best to you. And thanks to our attendees for making the time to attend. I do hope there was a lot that you could take away from this discussion. Do feel free to come back to view the recording. Look out for the follow-up email from the team. And do share the same with your colleagues as well. Do stay tuned to Finacle Conclave and enjoy the many high-quality speakers and discussions lined up for you today. Goodbye and stay safe.